I'm just going to focus today really on CSA, which is Community Supported Agriculture, for those of you who haven't heard of it before. I'm going to read out a sort of relatively short description of what CSA is, and the intent is really to be slightly provocative in that description. But I would just qualify it with the fact that they do differ quite wildly, depending on where they are, you know, between countries and between different places in different countries. Okay, but really I want to think about how labour is important in the context of CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. What are people's expectations and what do they get out of that labour experience? Okay, so here is a proposition to consider. If you commit several $100s to a local farm, you'll receive a weekly basket of organic produce for a growing season of around 6 months. The price you pay for these goods will likely be higher than a comparable assortment purchased at a conventional grocery store. You'll have little choice regarding specific items and their aesthetic qualities that make up your basket. Your weekly assortment will be primarily determined by the farmer's planting decisions, the exigencies of the weather and other factors that determine the relative success or failure of the crops. Invariably, the basket will contain much less of some produce that you prefer and too much of some produce you seldom use. Furthermore, the basket may also include items that you are not familiar with, do not know how to prepare, and may in fact not like. There will also be times when the only way to retrieve your share of a highly coveted crop, such as strawberries, will be to come out to the farm and pick it yourself. Oh yes, and there is one other little condition. You'll have to make a weekly trek to a designated drop-off point, or in some cases, the farm itself to pick up your basket. Last but not least, as an added benefit, you can purchase a worker share for about half the regular price. As a worker member, you'll devote 5 to 10 hours each week doing arduous labour in pouring rain, baking sun, or whatever inclement weather is doled out by Mother Nature. Now, are you ready to sign on? Now that's a slightly unbalanced description of the CSA, but it does qualify, it does capture the main features of the CSA, and they do vary. But so given that's the offer, why do people bother with the CSA? Is there an appeal to the work that's involved there? And what I want to do now is draw from some of the interviews that I've done already with the CSA members to just get some of those views and thoughts, I suppose, on what people say. So, no one really says, yes, I want to join the CSA because I need a meaningful job to do. I want something enjoyable to do for a job. But you can see from these quotes that labour does play an important role in annotating why people are interested in CSAs and also what they get out of them. So in the top quote, this person is talking about exercise, feeling like they've done something, and also learning. All of these things that are attractive about the CSA are made possible by the work that takes place there. The second quote expresses a desire to just get cultivating and get your hands in the soil. Might not be seen as work, but actually, as Tim said earlier, in allotments, this is all labour, this is work. It might not be paid work, but it's work. The next one, it's about control, knowing more about the food that is being produced. So it's less about thinking about work that you want to do, but more about reclaiming control over commodities that you would normally purchase through the conventional market. But also the communal effort is mentioned there, and this collective form of working that you find at CSAs. And this is really kind of captured in the last quote, where this person sees the work days as an opportunity to have a community. And this is a quote from someone who was moving to the UK from abroad. So this played a particularly strong role in why they wanted to join the CSA. But this community was structured around the work that takes place at the CSA. So what are some of the other features of work at CSAs? How is it actually experienced? This person talks about the flexibility in work, the idea that you're not paid to be there by an employer. You turn up. There's an expectation of work, but it's not set in stone. There's flexibility, and it can adapt to what your mood is. If I'm grumpy, I just want to be on my own, I can just thrash out some weeding. I can do that quietly, I can do it on my own. If I want to be social, I can go up and take long tea breaks and talk to people. spend longer, see more people. So it's adapting to this person's mood in this way. The idea of how tangible, how material and concrete the work is in CSAs, but also in gardening and growing, was a recurrent theme in my interviews that I've done. But this person is talking about the kind of satisfaction you get when you build a wall or paint a bedroom. You can see the meaning of what you've done and the usefulness of what you've done in your labour. That you can sit back and see it. I say I did something. Again, they go on to talk about the collective enterprise. That it's not just the satisfaction of your work and in the way that that's tangible, but also you can see how your work relates to the work of other people in producing a product that you share out. So it's not just about understanding your own work, it's also about understanding how your work is contributing to a wider enterprise. And this person says at the end, I think a lot of people lack that kind of really tangible satisfaction in their jobs. And that was, I haven't got many quotes on here, but that was something that came out of interviews as well, was this kind of comparison between the paid work which people are doing and the work that they do at the CSAs. And often these are people who, some of those kind of knowledge workers and the service work that is very different from the work you do in CSAs. So what do you get at the end of all this work? You get a product. And typically, when you have a product, when the workers make a product, it's sold and it's exchanged for money. In the CSA, the product is very different in that that's returned to the people who have laboured to produce it. So I just wanted to put this slide up because this is about someone's interpretation of what goes on in a conventional monetary exchange and how that can be an alienating experience, and contrast that to what goes on in CSA. So I've got no control over this. All I've got is my money. It doesn't feel good at all. Like, I know that with food there is monetary exchange, but that goes on, and there is with the CSA there is a monetary exchange. But when it's just money that's involved, it's rubbish. It feels really cheap, even if the vegetables are expensive. So there's nothing in it. You don't know anything about it. So it's this idea that there's a control and power dimension here that's different. But money is supposed to represent power. We use money as a way of expressing power, but actually, in the way this person talks about exchange, there's a lack of feeling of power, even though they're using money. So I also wanted to just draw attention to the way that labour is productive in a different sense to just the monetary sense in community sport agriculture and other community food initiatives. You don't get paid for it, but you do receive. It does have a productive effect, not just in creating food, but also in acting as a medium for sort of social relations. And I think this is the quote I had up earlier, but just slightly longer. This person, had this vision of the community that they could have by coming to a CSA, and that's actually what turned out. Interestingly, the interview that's taken from, the CSA there, really struggled with its productivity, to be honest, in terms of food. There was a bit of disappointment. There's a bit of disappointment with the level of food that they were receiving, I think, for the level of food that they were receiving for their work. But actually, they had all these other social things on that seemed to compensate. That people were willing to accept this lack of material food production for the other stuff. Not that they didn't want to try and address it. I think the second quote really sums up the way that this is a labour experience that allows you to do something productive, but also you have a meaningful kind of social exchange going on. And it's just nicely describes the kind of the processes going on there. Obviously, this kind of labour relationship changes people's relationship with the product. The experience and understanding of what the product is in this context is quite different to going into a supermarket and buying a pound of potatoes or something similar. this is partly I think partly to do with the way that food growing is a very material process and a very manual, concrete thing to do, generally speaking. But really, it's also key that the labourer is the person who's consuming the product. It changes the value relation that's going on here compared to how you would understand it under normal capitalist relation to production. So I think this is interesting. This person talks about how they like seeing where it comes from, and it's not all pretty and packaged in the store, and there's something that's kind of dirty and you have to clean it. They also kind of have this kind of momentary doubt where they think, well, actually sometimes I wish it was all clean and they cleaned up for me. But then they backtrack and say that actually no, I like that because that tells me the story of where that's come from, and I know where this particular product is, how it's been made, and whose hands it's passed through. So I want to now just talk about Marx, because no one's mentioned him yet, and we're doing a seminar about labour, so someone to really talk about him, I suppose.
In 2 minutes, please.
In 2 minutes. That's okay. It's phenomenal slide. So labour and how it's organised is, for Marx was the key thing about human society. And Marx, I've got this quote out from Marx's early writings, that free conscious activity is man's species character. And Marx saw labour really as the defining activity of humankind. This is what we do. We do things to meet our needs, and whether that's wage labour or whether that's doing the washing up or at home, it's all labour to meet our needs, and this is the defining feature of human beings, really. So if we're going to do a labour analysis, it's important to look at some of the stuff that we heard about this morning, but it's also important to look at the other kind of bits of labour that are going on in spaces like this as a space for sort of different values, and how we can maybe look at some of the more problematic areas of conventional wage labour and think about starting to restructure those along different principles that we can see being played out in other spaces like allotments and community food initiatives. But what Marx is alluding to here is also that he's got quite a specific definition of human nature. And I also just wanted to kind of float the idea of that this idea of human nature or an account of flourishing or well-being. I mean, Marx talks about social justice this morning. If we're going to move away from the kind of preoccupation with economic growth, then we need another kind of value framework to build something on. This is one potential way of looking at it as Marx, but I think really I want to just make a wider point that it's about getting away from economic growth towards something else. In my view, well-being, but just wanted to highlight the other aspects of human nature that Marx picks out, that we are linked to external nature, as it were, that we are deeply connected to the environment, and the way that conventional labour relations abstract us from that can have a negative effect on our human nature, and that we are social. And you can see how these features of human nature are being met in the kind of labour that goes on in CSAs. So that's the kind of optimistic picture. This is a wonderful space to be in. So I just wanted to highlight some of the problems with this perspective, I suppose, because it's not necessarily perfect. An honest day's work. There's partly one of the issues with these kind of initiatives is that there's an expectation of work, but work isn't managed in the same way as it would be in a typical labour setting. So, does everyone do their fair share, and how do you make sure that people do their fair share in cooperative forms of work? I'm just going to put these out here as potential problems. The reality of tangible labour. A lot of those quotes express the kind of positivity about how great it was to get your hands in the soil and be involved with one's food. But on the flip side, a lot of people actually have a real problem with getting that involved with their food, particularly when it comes to meat. And that was something that was expressed by some people in interviews, that the actual dealing with the reality of the labour that's needed to meet our needs, people have become very disconnected from it. So actually that's a cultural sort of problem, really. The next thing I wanted to highlight was, I think this was touched upon in the discussion around Abby's presentation, is that people are engaging in a form of labour in the CSA space, but they're also doing paid work elsewhere. And they may well be going to the supermarket and buying bananas or whatever. So there are all kinds of labour relations going on in this picture. So it would be oversimplistic to say this is a wonderful Eden here. But really, I don't know whether that highlights a problem with what I'm saying or a wider problem. But I just wanted to draw attention to that. But I mean, those forms of paid labour also allow people to engage with things like CSA and have the time to do it. Okay, so I'm not trying to say that we should just restructure the food system so it looks like a mass of CSAs. So that was my final point, really. That this is not to suggest that we all need to return to self-sufficiency, but it is to suggest that the values that are being expressed in those kind of initiatives can provide the basis for a wider change in the food system. And that's it.